So here's the deal. When Lightroom first came out with their newest update with the select subject and select sky masks, I was really, really stoked. I was enamored. I was enthralled. I was just the best. I was really happy. Now, a week later, now that I've gotten used to these new tools, I'm kind of friggin' angry at Lightroom for kind of moving things around and making things a little bit worse. So let me explain what I mean here and why you need to learn kind of these new shortcuts to be able to work more efficiently in Lightroom instead of having this update slow you down. Right, so inside of this tutorial, we're going to take a look at Lightroom's new update. We're going to practice together. So I've got some free raw files that you can actually download at signatureedits.com/free-raw-photos. From there, you can download these files, edit along with me to your heart's content, and hopefully pick up a new trick or two along the way. Now let's talk Lightroom's update. When they first came out, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I can literally click one button and click select sky, and bam, the sky is going to be detected. And now I don't have to fiddle around so much with auto masking. It's just brilliant, right? And same goes with subject. I could go in here, I'd hit OK, this little button here, and select subject, and voila. A couple seconds later, wow, perfect mask. This is absolutely amazing. Speeds things up so much. Or so I thought. Because while it does speed things up tremendously in terms of being able to mask out your subject and just the different things that you can do because of that, the problem is that it's introducing complexity to the system. And by that, I mean what they've done is they've taken something that used to be one click and made it 2 clicks. Let me explain. Previously, as you have no doubt noticed, the panel up here with all of your different tools looked a little bit different. You could access your radial filter, your graduated filter, your brush, whatever you needed to do. Now you have to hit this little button to open the Add New Mask panel and then select the brush or the linear gradient or the graduated filter, right? Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal until you're editing 1,000 photos. And that's why I didn't notice it at first, because I was like, oh, this is amazing. I'm always using select subject. I don't need these other tools anymore. Now, I'm just friggin' frustrated all the time because every single time I want to do something that doesn't involve select subject, I have to do 2 clicks instead of 1. Unless, of course, you leave this panel open, but I'm constantly finding it's going open, closed, whatever. So the main thing that I really, really want to communicate to you is if you've got this new update and you're using it, you need to get in the habit of learning these keyboard shortcuts, because the nice part is that Lightroom, I guess the guys were coded there saying, you know what, it is kind of annoying that these buttons aren't there anymore, but people can just use the shortcuts, right? So that'll make it really easy. And what's nice is that they did put the keyboard shortcuts for each of these little tools here. So if you want to add a brush to your little Lightroom situation, you don't have to open this button at all. You don't have to hit 2 buttons. It's brilliant. You just hit K and it will toggle to the brush, okay? So grab a photo, doesn't matter, head into Lightroom, hit the K, and you can add yourself a nice brush filter. Great, okay? Pun intended. Now, if you want to add a different brush, you have to go up here. You can see that linear gradient is a M. So remember, you've got K, and then directly underneath it, you've got M. Now, what's kind of annoying about this is previously, it was just things I didn't need to remember. I could just go up here in the panel and it was just as fast for me to select the tool I needed. Now I have to just remember the keyboard shortcut. So it's kind of asking me to learn a little bit more, but it's really going to be worth it in the end because you are going to work a little bit faster. So we've got K for the brush, M for the graduated filter, and you can see we can make as many as we want, and it's actually a lot faster than if you were just selecting it every time with your mouse, right? Because you can add a million of them really, really quickly, whereas previously you would have had to go over here, graduated filter, right? Okay. And lastly, we've got Shift M. I don't know why they did this instead of just, J, so they were all next to each other, but whatever. Shift M is going to be a graduated filter. So little radial filter. Shift M. Of course, I can't see it. So we're going to keep editing these photos together, but I just wanted to cover that. If you're finding, like me, that this new 2-click system is freaking enraging, all you have to do is just remember the keyboard shortcuts, K, M, Shift M. And then, of course, we've got a color range and luminance range masks as well. Shift plus J and Shift Q. Okay, so let's head over here and we're just going to do some editing now together. Create something awesome. So first off, we're going to just make some basic adjustments. Things look a little bit cool, so I'm going to warm it up a little bit, and a little bit dark, so I'm going to increase my exposure somewhere around there. Then I'm just going to adjust. Going by my histogram, I can see that I could push things quite a ways. So I'm going to press J. That's going to let me see if I'm clipping things in my photo. I'm going to raise my highlights up, And then I'm going to take my shadows and take them down. And I can do the same thing with the whites until I get that little bit of red. That means that now I've blown the sky out. So I'm going to do the same thing with the blacks, take it down until around there. So that's how you can make sure you're not clipping any of your blacks or your whites, but you're kind of maximizing how much pop you can get out of the image really quickly and simply, right? Okay, so now that we've done that, we can start kind of enhancing things a little bit more selectively. Let's start with the sky. I want my sky to be nice and blue and popping. So let's go to our new Select Sky tool. One little thing too, if Lightroom is watching, it's really annoying, guys, that you added shortcuts for everything, for the brush, for the radial filter, whatever, but you didn't add one for Select Sky or Select Subject. So now every time I want to add a subject mask, I have to go up here, Create Mask, Select Subject. Again, 2 clicks when it should be 1 click. It's just less efficient. So I've selected my sky, theoretically. Good. And now I'm going to grab my white balance like that. Easiest way to make a sky more blue, just take the white balance, make it more blue. And if you're finding that your presets or whatever they're kind of washing out the colors in the sky, probably it's because it's warming out the white balance, because oftentimes the rest of the photo looks great, really warm, but it washes out the sky. So easy peasy, now that we can just mask out the sky super simply with Lightroom's new tools, we're going to just add some blue like that. So here's before and here's after. Great. Now let's take it a little bit further. We're going to take our exposure down a little bit. Take the highlights up a bit. Take the whites up a bit, and you can see it's still going red because I've had the J key enabled. The other way to enable that shortcut is you can just hit this little guy up here in the histogram, and that will show you when things are clipping. Okay, what else can we do? We can maybe add a little bit of texture and clarity, and sometimes that can add some pop too to those clouds, if there are any. If your sky is just blue, this won't do anything. And then maybe a little bit of dehaze. Good. And of course, if you want to go all out, you can even add some color. Just like that. Okay, that's like the bluest sky you've ever seen. Totally unrealistic and way too dark. So I'm going to brighten it back up to somewhere around there. So here's before and here's after. I would say that we've added a little bit of color. Now, of course, I always take things way too far, so I'm just going to dial back the amount that we're kind of adding in here a little bit. Good. Okay, next up, we're going to duplicate this mask. Now, this is kind of a handy trick. If you're masking out the sky, obviously that's pretty self-explanatory. But if you want to, you can actually grab that same mask, you can duplicate it, and now I can invert it, hitting the apostrophe key on my keyboard. Now it's going to select everything except for the sky. So you've got a sky mask, and you've also got a unsky mask. I don't know what you'd call it. A land mask. So we're just going to erase everything on this brush by holding the Alt key on our keyboard. Hit Reset up here. And now we can do whatever we need to with the foreground. So I'm going to make it a little bit darker. And add a little texture, a little clarity up in here. And I'm going to add some green just to make the hills a little bit more green. And then I'm going to raise up my whites because things look kind of dead. Raise my highlights maybe a little bit. And call it a day. So let's start by warming things up to, I don't know, around there. I'm going to grab my highlights, pull those back because I want things to feel like really warm and milky film-like. So to do that, we're just going to kind of maximize the dynamic range. We don't want any clipping going on here. So I could hit J and make sure I'm not clipping anything. Okay, so I'm going to pull my whites back. I might pull my highlights back up a little bit. Okay, somewhere around there. Now, it doesn't look very magical. In fact, it looks way less moody and dramatic. But we're just kind of setting the stage so we have some more options. So now, I'm going to head over to my tone curve of truth, justice, illumination, and wonderment. And I'm going to start by just adding a little pop. So I took the contrast away up here. And now I'm adding it back with the tone curve. And you might say, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just leave it like it was originally? It's all about control and finesse. So with our tone curve here, I've added a standard S-curve. That means that I've kind of raised the highlights up. That's this little dot here. I made another dot here on the shadow kind of zone. And I've made one more in the mids. The mids is just to keep things from going too crazy. If I didn't have this, then I have a straight line in between these two. And it just, I don't know. It still works. You can do that. But sometimes I find the middle is just easier. Anyways, we've got our shadows. So we're dropping our shadows a little bit. We're raising our highlights a little bit. And now I can grab my whites and actually take that white point down. So you're going to see as I do that, watch this white place here on the banister or trim, whatever it is there. It's getting like more creamy and washed out and clipped. So we've kind of got more of like a film-like texture, sort of. Because things aren't true black and they aren't true white anymore. So I'm going to drag it up like that. So here's before, here's after, okay? And here's the original image, and here's where we're at so far. So now, this is a trick I like doing because I just like the way it feels. I like to add a little bit of green to the blacks. Not too much and not too obvious, but like just a little bit. If you actually hold Option on your keyboard, it'll make this a lot more of a fine adjustment. So we're going to add just a bit. And I'm going to go into my blues, and I'm actually going to do the kind of opposite-ish. I'm going to take the blue point down in the whites and the highlights. And that's just going to make our whites and highlights more yellow. You can see that being added here as I do it. So one of those, kind of like that. Keep it pretty subtle. It's just going to warm things up in the highlights and add some green in the shadows. So before, after. Here's before, after. So we've got a nice warm portrait going on. Now it's just a matter of kind of doing some more tweaking, seeing what we like, what we don't like. So I could grab our yellows. Let's desaturate them a little bit. And anything that isn't really in here already, I'm going to desaturate just because. I'm going to take the saturation of our reds and make it a little bit more orange. Good, and then our skin tone, I want just a little bit more red. Just a little bit. Okay, so that's before and after with the HSL. I could also maybe make the skin slightly brighter, but I'm not digging it, so I'm just going to leave it. Next, tone from color grading. So I'm going to take my shadows. We're going to add some nice greeny yellow to it because that's the color I like. Then we're going to add some more yellows to the highlights. That feels about right, maybe. I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if this has been helpful, can you hit that like button? That'd be swell. We'll be friends forever. Okay, and I'm actually going to increase the luminosity a little bit of our highlights and the midtones. Okay. And then midtones, we didn't really add any color to this. I don't know if we need to. I think I'm just going to leave it. So before and after color grading. Good. We're almost there. I'm going to do some sharpening. I like to have it all the way up because I'm a crazy person. And then I hold down the Alt button on my keyboard. You can grab your mask slider, drag it up, and that'll actually show you what's getting sharpened and what's not. When the mask is all the way white, that means everything's being sharpened. And then as you drag it up, only the white parts are actually getting sharpened. So in this case, I don't want to sharpen everything in the image. Kind of just her and her clothing and kind of like the more obvious lines, right? So then, because I'm not doing it to absolutely everything, let's zoom in. You can see it doesn't really look over sharpened even though I'm a monster and sharpening is all the way up. But it is definitely a lot more sharp. Now you could take this one step further. I could dial my masking back a little bit, take my detail up, and you're going to see that it really is just like way overdoing it. But then we can add a little bit of noise reduction. That's going to smooth things out naturally. And scroll down to our color grain. There we go. And by adding our grain in here, you can see we're both clipping the shadows. But we're also making things a lot softer. As I adjust the roughness and the size of the grain, it's going to rob the image of some of its clarity. And so the fact that we over sharpened it is kind of compensating for adding a whole bunch of grain later. So depending on how much grain you want, you can kind of just factor that in. So as you're kind of zooming out a little bit, you can see, okay, there's quite a bit of grain here. So maybe I'll dial it back just a little bit. Somewhere around there. So here's without the grain, and here's with. Depends. I'm kind of going for a vintage feel, so I like it. You might not. I don't know. World's your oyster. You do you. Okay, so lastly, we could then go in with some adjustment layers. And here's where it's really annoying, right? You'd have to hit the masking and then hit K, or then hit the brush tool, or you could just hit K. Save yourself some trouble. I am going to brighten up her face and her eyes a little bit. So we'll start by just the face overall. I'm going to take my contrast down. I'm also going to take my white balance down a little bit. And that's just going to kind of desaturate her skin a little. because it's already kind of a little too yellow. So by taking the white balance down, we're sort of adding the opposite, which is blue. And then I can take my saturation down a little too. Okay. I'm going to zoom in here. And you know what? Maybe it's actually better darker. Sometimes it is, and you're just wrong. I'm okay with that. Good. And add another mask here by hitting K again. KK. And I'm going to just brighten up her eyes. And add a little magenta because they look kind of too green. And a little too blue. Cool. Might have taken that too far. We'll see. If you zoom out, you can see her eyes are like kind of a little creepy. That's because I took it too far. So we're going to dial that back a little bit. Okay, so here's before. Here's after. We could keep going, but I think you kind of get the gist of it. Again, I'm still working on remembering all of these keyboard shortcuts, so that's why I'm so enraged when I'm like, all I want to do is add a radio filter, but where the heck do I find it? It's up here, and then I have to go over here. Shift-M. Shift-M. Remember, people. Okay, last little idea. We could add kind of a sun flare coming in from the side to enhance this light as if it were spilling in from a window. So I'm going to grab the exposure, take it all the way up, make it all the way warm, contrast down, highlights down, shadows up, whites down, blacks up, texture way down, clarity way down, dehaze way down. Okay, now you can see we've got this kind of roving spotlight, roaming, kind of like that. I am going to take my highlights down even more, my contrast down a little bit, make it slightly less yellow and slightly less bright. Something like that. So here's before and here's after. You can see it really adds some nice dimensionality. Good. And then we had a radio filter. And I turned it into a sun flare. Let's add one onto our subject. So we're just going to make it. And then I'm going to rotate it like that. And then we're just going to take our contrast down a little bit. So that's going to brighten her naturally, but in like a really kind of organic way. Like so. And then I can darken the whole image down a little bit. Add a little bit more drama. Drama. Here's before. Here's after. If you like it, great. If you don't, make something new. All right, this one, let's do another moody, warm portrait. Let's just play around. So we're going to grab our white balance, take that up like that. That's kind of where I want things to land, but her skin looks really weird like that. So we're going to take it to around here instead. Then I'm going to grab a graduated filter. So Shift-M. Bam. Like that. And we could try and intersect it with select subject. Could have just gone select subject, but why not? And then we're going to grab our contrast, bring it way down on her. Highlights down, shadows up, whites down, blacks up. Basically, I just want to make her pop out a little bit and not be quite so harsh in terms of lighting. We could even take our texture down a little bit. That'll give her more of an airbrushed kind of feel and clarity up. So here's before and here's after. We've really separated her from the background and kind of added a little bit of a glow, soften things down. I can go back to this mask and then cool it down a little bit, and then I'll be able to warm up the rest of the image. So let's do that. Okay. Let's say that's where we want it. Let's add a little bit of contrast with our tone curve. Not that much. Okay. Then let's play around with our saturation in our HSL. So I'm going to take my yellows down. I'm actually going to take everything down. Let's go with like a kind of black look. I think it'll be interesting. So everything except for the reds and the oranges, because that's where her skin tone is living, and that'll be weird. And then we're going to take our luminance up on all of these. And you're going to see, for some reason, not working super great. Okay, you win some, you lose some. In this case, this photo is not liking it, so we're just going to go without. The other way, of course, you could do it is by selecting her. We're going to duplicate this mask. we're going to, you guessed it, invert it with the apostrophe key and find out that that doesn't seem to want to work. So we're going to delete it, create a new mask, select subject, then invert it, apostrophe key. Okay, take our saturation down, contrast down, ooh, exposure down. And white balance down. That'll give us that black effect. We finally got there, people. Okay. Now, the one thing I'm not loving about this is it just feels like the photo's kind of flat in the back. Like I want there to be a little bit more texture, a little bit more brightness. So maybe let's take that exposure back up a little. Add some texture and some clarity. Something like that. Around there. Okay, before. After. Pretty significant. Okay, moving on with the day. To zoom out a little bit. A couple options here. Let's start by selecting our subject. And I just want that background to kind of fade into infinity. So let's start by selecting our subject. Hit the apostrophe key. That'll grab the background. Then I'm going to take my exposure way the heck up. And you can see it's not horrible. But not great. Okay, I'm going to take my contrast down, my highlights down, my texture down, and my clarity and dehaze down. That's just going to make sure that if the mask has anything kind of like looking a little bit weird, like any rough edges and stuff, it's hopefully going to smooth them out a little, and I can take my sharpness down as well. Okay, so here's before and here's after. Good. Now we can brighten up our subject, and our subject looks pretty cool, but we are definitely going to have to deal with the fact that they've got a lot of contrast going on their face. So let's grab a brush, hit the K key on your keyboard. Still on auto mask, but that's not too bad. Grab our contrast, bring it down, texture down, clarity down. Basically, I just want to smooth out the skin, get a really nice blemish-free situation going on, and then I'm going to add some detail and some saturation, contrast, everything back in. For now, I just want nice, smooth, perfect skin. Press O. Make sure it's got everything. Okay, that looks pretty good. Grab our texture, take it down even more. Sometimes the noise slider will help you. Sometimes it does nothing. In this case, it appears to do nothing. We'll take our sharpness down too. Just a little bit. Okay, so here's before that brush. Here's after it. You can see things feel a lot better. We'd also take our highlights down a little bit too. Okay, we are making some strides here, people. Next step, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And we're just going to add some contrast back in selectively. So I'm going to hit K on my keyboard. That'll add a nice brush tool. We're going to draw onto her eyebrows. Lightroom's going to say, hey, we're going to auto mask for you, Ryan. And we're actually going to work not too bad. And I'm going to say, thank you. Thank you, automask, for kind of working sometimes. I don't get it. Lightroom can come out with this amazing AI-powered subject selection that is just perfect, but their automask tool seems to get worse with every update. Just saying. Okay, now what I'm going to do, increase the contrast. I'm basically going to do the opposite of what our main mask did, which was kind of soften everything. Now, on these selective points of detail, I'm going to add some clarity, some dehaze, lower the shadows, raise the highlights, lower the blacks, right? You can see because the mask was on auto mask and it kind of didn't grab the eyebrow very naturally, we're going to just unselect it and just see what happens when we extend that out. Probably can't get away with quite that much. Take our saturation down, our exposure down a little bit. So here's before and here's after. Now that might be too far. Always make sure you zoom out because that's when it becomes really obvious if you've gone too far or not. I probably have, so we'll just dial it back. And then I'm going to continue adding onto the lips. The end of the nose. Anything that would normally be kind of sharp and now doesn't look sharp, even that dimple, that might be a little too far. Edge of her ears. But be careful you don't take it too far because that'll just exaggerate certain things. So we'll do that on a separate mask. I'm going to grab a new mask, hit K. Now I'm just going to do a basic sweep over those same areas again. That should be a little bit sharper. And I'm being really, really fussy, as you can tell. Absolutely perfect masking. And the reason I'm not worrying about it too much, I'm not adding like a super intense effect, so it's not going to show up too much if my mask isn't perfect. Okay, that looks good. And I'm going to make one more mask. Her shoulder, the skin here, just not looking perfect. So again, we're going to do kind of the same thing as before. Clarity down, texture down, dehaze not that far. And of course, we could go in and use our spot removal tool to just clean up any last blemishes. So grab it really quick. Swing, swing. Again, Lightroom spot removal tool. Seems slower than it ever did before. And I'm on like a really expensive iMac, so it should be working. You can see her skin still isn't perfect, so if you're going to be really fussy, you could go in here, adjust these blemishes one at a time. If you're going to be like Ryan and kind of edit a whole bunch of photos, well, then just go on top of the parts that still need to be cleaned up a little bit, like that. Take your texture down, add a little bit of dehaze. Sometimes that'll work, sometimes it won't. Sharpness down. You got to be careful. You take it too far, obviously it's not going to work so well, but I think that's not too bad. We could clean up our mask because it's not perfect. It's a little bit jagged, but overall, here's before and here's after. I think we made some nice progress. So last of all, I am going to go back into this mask and just clean it up a little bit because it's kind of it's just not super soft, I guess. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go intersect mask with, and we're going to go to brush. And hopefully, if we press O so we can see what we're doing. Of course, it's not going to work properly. Let's try this again. We're going to add brush. There we go, not intersect with. And then just around the hair. Not that much. But I'm going to grab my brush settings, add brush, which is Option K apparently, and take my flow down. And basically, this mask was just like a little bit too sterile, a little bit too harsh. So I'm going to soften it up a little bit by kind of going around the edges like that. Okay, now press O, and you can see that before we had some kind of like harsh lines going on. Oh, hello. And now things are just a little bit more transparent. Cool. Okay, so I think we've been going at it for a little while. We've got some more images that you can have fun with and experiment with, but hopefully this has been helpful for you in some way, shape, or form. If it was, do me a favor, hit that like button, leave a comment below. What do you think? What do you want me to see? What do you want to see me do a tutorial on next? Happy to take feedback. I'm just helping your business grow, help you increase your editing, whether it's a specific style or a specific problem you're struggling with. And if you want to pay it forward, thank all these awesome people who uploaded photos for you to edit. You can upload a few at signatureedits.com for yourself and maybe even get featured. So I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, create something awesome. Peace out.